Hello and welcome back to Survey Biology, and today we're going to work on section 3 of unit 8, which is on population growth, and today we're going to look at life strategies and survivorship curves. So we're going to look at different strategies or characteristics that different animals might have as they reproduce to help them survive. And if you look at the picture here, here's two extreme examples. So in the upper picture you see a frog that is literally swimming in its eggs. There's hundreds if not thousands of potential offspring there. And on the bottom we've got a gorilla who will only have one offspring every 4 or 5 years. So we really kind of have the two extremes of their reproductive capability. The frog's got a very high biotic potential. If the conditions are good, they can have many offspring. But in reality, most of those eggs are going to die, or most of the frog tadpoles that hatch are going to die very soon. And of the thousands of eggs, only 1 or 2 may survive. And the gorilla, on the other hand, has decided to put its energy into taking care of the one offspring that it has. So there's a high likelihood that its one offspring will survive. So let's look at how we can kind of categorize those two different types of strategies. So on the first, the upper one, if you remember, this is called the carrying capacity. We've got exponential growth up to a certain point right here, and then it kind of levels off. It's got a little bit of a sawtooth curve, if you remember that. But these are called K strategists because their populations tend to be around the carrying capacity of a population. They tend to be stable, long-lived. And on the bottom, here's our exponential growth. Here's our J curve. And what we see here, these are called R strategists. And they have a very high reproductive rate. So things like insects, fish, that will have lots and lots of offspring. Many of them won't survive, but if the conditions are good, they can really take advantage of it. So the two strategies that we're going to kind of compare and contrast are going to be the K versus the R strategists. And here's kind of a continuum, and that's what it is. You know, there's no one animal that's one or the other, but it's kind of along the continuum. And if you look at the far left over here, oysters are an example that is used quite a bit. And they can produce 500 million fertilized eggs a year. But of those 500 million, relatively few, less than 1%, will actually grow to adulthood. Once they become adults, the oysters are very stable and they can live long lives. And then over on the far right, we've got the other example is the gorilla that I mentioned before, is that they're going to have one offspring every 4 or 5 years. So they're really not going to have a chance to increase their population that quickly. And in the middle we have, I talked about the frog, we've got rabbits that have 12 offspring a year. And everything in between. So it's kind of continuum from the extreme left, the R strategist, to the extreme right, the K strategist, and everything in between. So here's a quick list of some characteristics that it might have. And really they're kind of opposites of each other. So on the left we have the R strategist, on the right we have the K strategist. So R strategists are short-lived. They tend to have a very short life. Insects can have lifespans on the order of days once they've mated. K strategists are very long-lived. Humans, elephants, tortoises can live many years. R strategists will have large litters. As we said, the oysters can have 500 million offspring in a year. Mice can have 8 to 10 offspring at once. K strategists are the other example. Many of them will only have 1, sometimes 2 offsprings at a time. R strategists, again, they reproduce at an early age. They reach sexual maturity very soon so that they can start reproducing as soon as possible and try to have as many offspring as possible. K strategists, on the other hand, reach sexual maturity at a much later age. They postpone it. R strategists have little or no parental care. In the case of the oysters, there's no parental care at all. The eggs are dispersed and the parents take no care whatsoever. They had decided to put their energy into producing as many offspring as possible. The K strategists, on the other hand, have a high level of parental care. So their strategy is to take that amount of energy they have, only have 1 or 2 offspring, and make sure those offspring survive. So they're really balancing where they can allot their energy. The R strategists put that energy into having lots and lots of offspring that they don't really take care of and hope that a few survive. The K strategist will have only 1 or 2 offspring, but they'll put that energy into making sure that they do survive. R strategists have high infant mortality. There's a good chance that most of the offspring are going to die very quickly after being born. This is an early loss scenario. Whereas case strategists have a low infant mortality. They have more late loss. And then so they do survive, and when they get older, they can no longer forage for food or protect themselves. That's when they start to die. And here's another list that has some of the same, but some new ones as well. So offspring, as we see, the R strategists have many, the K strategists few. Parental care is a big one that I said before. Parental care, the R strategists have a lot less. The K strategists have more. Mortality is very high for the R strategist. Body size is one that wasn't on the list before. So R strategists tend to be small. Think of mice, insects, fish, whereas K strategists tend to have a large body size. Elephants, rhinoceros, cougars. Onset of maturity we talked about. Favorite environment. The R strategists tend to like unstable environments. We talked about boom and bust curves before, and here's an example. So the R strategists are really able to take advantage of the good conditions, and if this environment's unstable, during good years their population will boom, during bad years it will go down, but they're able to bounce back. K strategists, on the other hand, prefer stable environments. They are well adapted for the conditions that are there. Type of species, we have pioneer species, so those are the first ones into an area, whereas K strategists tend to be climax. Population size for the R strategists will vary. We talked about the boom and bust, but for the K strategists it tends to be stable. They're operating at carrying capacity. We talked about that sawtooth curve that may fluctuate a little bit, but not very much. So here's a specific example of two. So we've got the Norway rat, which is definitely R selected, versus the African elephant, which is K selected. So reaches sexual maturity, reproductive maturity. The Norway rat is ready to breed in 3 to 4 months. It's really made for, it's adapted to reproduce, whereas the African elephant isn't going to reproduce until it's 10 to 12 years old. Okay, the average gestation period, 22 to 24 days. So the rats can, every 3 weeks or so, 3 to 4 weeks, they can have a new litter, whereas an African elephant stays pregnant for over a year, almost 2 years, 22 months. Time to weaning, so when the offspring can leave the mother. With the rats, 3 to 4 weeks, so there is some parental care, but not a lot. For the African elephant, if we look here, it's over 4 years, 48 to 108 months. They stay with the mother for a very long time. Breeding interval for the female, the Norway rat can breed up to 7 times a year, whereas the African elephant is only going to breed every 4 to 9 years. And offspring for litter, we see the rat has an average of 8, and the African elephant has an average of 1, with 2 at the most. So very different strategies where they decide to allot their energy. And closely related to that, the R and K, is this idea of survivorship curves. And here's a survivorship curve where there's 3 types. There's type 1, type 2, and type 3. And all survivorship curves, what they're tracking is they're tracking a population. Usually it starts at 1,000, and they're tracking that population from that population of 1,000 all the way down to when the population reaches 0 down here. Okay? And so if we look at type 1, so they're using man as an example. This is an example of late loss. And what happens here is the curve tends to be very flat early on because there's low mortality. They don't have a lot of offspring, but the ones they do have, they survive. They've got a lot of parental care, and it's not until they reach later in life that they get older, disease, the inability to find food starts to set in, and then their population goes down very, very quickly. The steepness of this curve is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. So type 1 is late loss, and that's definitely a K strategist. The other extreme is a type 3. So here's your oysters, which are an R. This is what's called early loss. So they will have lots of offspring at once, but most of them are going to die right away. Very few survive to adulthood. So they've got a very heavy early loss or early mortality. But once they reach adulthood, the ones that do survive are able to stay alive for a long time. Now eventually they all end up down here at a 0 population, but it's just how they get there. And finally type 3, right down the middle, excuse me, type 2 right down the middle is kind of constant mortality throughout their life. So songbirds, there's an equal chance that they may be pushed out of the nest as maybe predated upon by a hawk during their lifetime. So they're kind of right down the middle. And here's another example of the survivorship curve. Just again, we've got late mortality, late loss, and we've got early mortality or early loss. So we've got the type 1. And what would an example of a type 1 be? Something like an elephant, a rhinoceros, something that is very large, is going to have few offspring. What would the example of a type 3 be? Well, there's your oysters, your insects, your fish that have lots and lots of offspring, but they don't survive very well until later in life. And then finally, your type 2, a kind of middle of the road, there's equal sources of mortality throughout their lifespan. So that wraps up section 3 of Unit 8. So again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time.